Make a start. A warm welcome to everybody to this event tonight. And this is an event which is organised by the OA Club, the Old Abingdonians Club, but it's fantastic to be able to welcome current pupils alongside some OAs and parents as well for this event which will focus on entrepreneurship. And the OA Club is a really important part of our wider school community. We're really fortunate to have a very vibrant organisation that supports our former pupils and keeps them in touch with one another and with the school. And I discovered today that the first event of the OA Club took place back in the 1760s. So it's quite a venerable organisation, clearly supporting a very old school as well. But one of the great benefits of the OA Club is the way that Old Abingdonians come back into school for events like this and to think about how they can support our current pupils. And we really benefit from the expertise that our OAs bring coming back to school and sharing their experiences, particularly connected to careers. So we have a careers event for lower sixth formers, which takes place in the Michaelmas term, where we have a whole range of careers that are represented, and students can find out more about those. And then we have other events when OAs do come back to the school. I'm delighted that we have got one on tonight, focusing on entrepreneurship, which I think is a really exciting topic. It is always interesting talking to OAs about the different routes that people take to get through their professional lives. It's quite rare nowadays that people perhaps just start in one profession and continue in that throughout their working lives, or indeed that they start in one particular job or direction of travel and stay in that. And so I think it's really exciting to learn how people make those changes and grasp those opportunities. And for me, the kind of whole theme of entrepreneurship is really exciting. Like many of us, I'm sure I'm motivated by shows like Dragon's Den and so on. And I think just people coming up with ideas, turning those ideas into reality and commercializing them is just an extraordinary process. And I'm delighted that we can focus on that this evening. So I'm really grateful to our OAs who are coming in tonight. It was great to hear some music from Duro as we came in. Duro is the only OA who is here at the same time as me, a more recent OA, but I remember you developing your interest in music as you moved through the school and sharing that with us. And I also saw Duro down at Bristol University at a social event recently, and you were just going off to run a DJ night. So you can tell us more about that as well. So I'm going to hand over to Mr. Gray in a moment. I would just like to express my thanks to the OA Club team who've made this event possible, especially Becca, who I know has put an enormous amount of work into it. So many thanks to them. And Mr. Gray, over to you.
So I'm Tony Gray, Head of Business and Economics at Abingdon School since September 2020. And thanks to Alexa and Becca for putting together such an event. I've been Head of Business and Economics here since September 2020 at an international school in Spain for 2 or 3 years. And before that, at Charles School for a long time, and then West London. So I've done this kind of job for a long time. And I've pulled together events where we've got business speakers in. We try to help the young enterprise students to work closely. So it is fantastic the work you've done, and a huge thank you to giving up your time here. The EdXL A-Level Business course has a big chunk on it on entrepreneurship nowadays. In terms of the characteristics and skills of entrepreneurs, so we're going to be interested in hearing about that from you guys, about the role of entrepreneurs, what motivates you, and also that step from entrepreneurship to leadership that you have to take sometimes, and also, yes, barriers to entrepreneurship too. Duro is our first, one of our entrepreneurs we're going to have speaking. So we're going to go to our guest speakers and then we'll do a Q&A. So please make a note, be it mental or on paper, to get a question lined up because we're hoping to get lots of questions and get them answered. But with Duro, I started here in September 2020. Duro's an upper sixth business studies student. So I remember telling him about, trying to bring the subject alive and telling him about kind of a baking business I was involved with. Didn't make huge amounts of profit. Cycling business is a bit more relevant to Duro because we did do event management, and being an entrepreneur involves risks. There's the risk of no one turning up and you've got a big loss, but there's also a risk of something going wrong, an accident. So it's something I'll be interested to hear from you, Duro, in terms of your kind of event management. With Duro, you're now at Bristol University doing business management in your second year, and just picking up on Abingdon says that you had a passion for producing and mixing music, and this passion's carried on. And we were talking about events in Bristol and how there was a bit on the radio 4 or 5 about the Bristol music scene and how it's quite spread out geographically and the challenges that can bring about for you as an entrepreneur. With Stephen, in terms of one thing I'll be interested in hearing with you, Stephen, is about the turn of the century I was involved with a marketing company. So in terms of routes to market, we were looking at IT, computers, software, going into new markets like Central Eastern Europe. And I remember very distinctly one of the issues was about trying to get people to buy online and how you could track what they were doing. Now, this is 2000, 2001. You could track online them clicking on it, taking it to the till, and then they'd pause and they wouldn't go there. They wanted to speak to someone on the phone or email and get a response. So I'm very interested for you, Stephen, about conversion, the world's largest conversion rate optimization. So if I'm right, that's that kind of thing in terms of getting people to take action on the websites, on business websites. And conversion, I can see he's worked with Meta, Microsoft, Deliveroo, Tesco. So it is the biggest company, I'm right in saying, in terms of this area in the world. And then in terms of that movement from being an entrepreneur to a leader, it says that you sold conversion in 2020, but obviously you've still got a business management role there. So it would be interested to hear some of the challenges there, because that's something that students are finding in lessons and could get as an exam question. But it also picks up about Sideshow Group and sister company Bunnyfoot, so again, it'd be interesting to hear about that. We'll start with Merlin. Now, you two were old Abingdonians at the same time, weren't you? You left in 97.
Yeah.
So you want to say a little bit about how you've known each other?
Well, I thought it was very diplomatic of Mr. Windsor to refer to recent old Abingdonians, very ancient old Abingdonians. But yeah, we were best friends since about age 7, I think, weren't we? Pretty much, and moved from our previous school to Abingdon together, or almost together. So yeah. So
Merlin, your area of business is different in some respects because it's focusing on primary healthcare, GP services.
Yeah.
It says here that 85% of English GP practices you provide the clinical decision support software.
Yeah.
That's a phenomenal figure. The company being Ardens, primary care IT consultancy service, helping private clients as well, and primary care data analytics. So I think it's going to be better from you to explain
so
this.
It's difficult to put it in a succinct way.
Yeah, so I'll go to you now.
Okay, so can everyone hear me all right? So I think probably it's easiest to just give a very brief sort of story of my journey, if you like, because I think Abingdon plays an important role in that, but I don't think I appreciated it when I was at school. So, you know, looking back on school, I think Abingdon had a really important role in terms of giving me confidence and so on to pursue what I wanted to do. But I didn't appreciate school when I was at school in the way I should have done, I think. And I think that's important for you guys, particularly ones still at school, to remember, because it's kind of shoring you up, and it's stuff that will come in useful later on. It's like savings in a way. You bank it now and you use it later on. So what I mean by that is, I guess at Abingdon, you know, I was sort of fairly apathetic about choosing what I wanted to do, and I think a lot of people don't have a clear idea. But I decided at the point of choosing A-levels to do medicine, and at the time I wanted to be a surgeon, and then having gone to medical school and done a bit of surgery, didn't really feel that the career of a surgeon was what I wanted to do. And I really liked the problem solving, I liked the detective work bit of medicine, and the only two sort of areas left with real problem solving were accident and emergency medicine or general practice, because that's unfiltered problems that you have to deal with. You're a cardiologist, you might be doing a heart failure clinic, everyone's got heart failure, you pretty much know that when they come in the door, your job is to sort them out. I preferred the kind of diagnostic detective type stuff, so I wanted to do primary care. And I went into an A&E career, but having a family and children is not really, doesn't play nicely with that as an emergency career with nights and so on. So I decided to go into general practice, and I was a partner in a practice in Oxford City for about 10 years. And during that time I met another GP doing out of hours in Abingdon Hospital, actually just up the road, and we used to see, used to cover the patients I needed seeing in the evening for the whole of Oxfordshire. And one of the things that struck us about each other was that we were both sort of interested in this problem solving, and there was quite a lot about the computer systems that we used on a day-to-day basis that were really frustrating us. And we started to find out that actually the computer systems that GPs use, there are two big systems that GPs use to record their medical notes in this country. There's a few smaller players, but there's two monopoly companies, and they both produce something which the Department of Health has given them a sort of blanket contract for, but they're both not that great out of the box, so they fulfill their bare minimum contractual obligations, but they are much more powerful pieces of software, but no one's using them. And the problem has got worse because doctors are so oversubscribed now, they don't have time to work out how to operate a computer system. So anyway, I started tinkering with my practice. Miles, my business partner, started tinkering with his practice, and we started to realise that you could actually build tools within the system that would automate a lot of process for you and make things a lot easier. And the reason that's important is for several reasons. One, it improves safety, but from a GP's point of view, the other thing is it improves income. If you write stuff down properly, you get paid properly for what you're doing. So there were lots of GPs doing work they weren't being paid for because they were not writing it down in a way that ticks the boxes for the contract. So we produced these tools, and we initially produced them for our own surgeries, and then we started swapping them. So we would meet at Abingdon Hospital and say, oh, what have you done this week? Oh, I've written this little thing, and we'd swap them. And over a while we amassed a kind of tool set, really, of these little automations and so on for our systems. And then we thought, well, hang on a minute, there's probably people all over the country reinventing the wheel here and not really having time to do it properly. Let's just see if anyone wants to buy this. And I think we had about 2 customers in our first year, and it was all very sort of almost like a hobby business done on the side of our full-time GP partnerships. But then over time, it gathered sort of momentum, and we got people saying, well, can you do this? Can you do that? And lots of good feedback was coming, and we sort of tried to be as responsive as possible to service the need and to keep abreast of new contractual changes, new safety issues that come out weekly, and drugs that people have prescribed for 20 years, suddenly you find there's a new problem with, and so GPs need alerting to that. They can't be reading everything all the time and practicing medicine all the time. It's impossible to keep up with the volume. So it was a way of just sort of helping nudge people. And I mean, at the time, no one else was doing this stuff really. There's a name for it now. It's clinical decision support software. It's what was on my sort of pressy, and it basically means helping clinicians to make clinical decisions. Okay, a computer is some way off, despite what you might read about ChatGPT and so on. Computers are some way off replacing doctors for various reasons, but there are lots of things which you can help nudge people for, and that's what clinical decision support software does. So over the years we've expanded, and we've really, I would say, sort of found and professionalised this little niche area of provision of software, and it's gone from building effectively on another person's system. So we build tools on these 2 big core clinical systems, but we've now started building extra software products that are add-ons that you can use for data analytics, so you can see how you're performing. You can look across a whole health economy about how you're performing, and our contracts are now getting taken by health authorities. So rather than each individual practice in Oxfordshire buying the Arden software, Oxfordshire is called an integrated care board, but the overall health authority for Buckinghamshire, Berkshire and Oxfordshire buys it now for everyone, so the GPs don't have to buy it individually. We provide that on a localised basis for the whole of the area. And so the scale of it has grown, and because of that, the scope for what we're doing has grown, because now people at NHS England are pricking up their ears and saying, oh, well, if you've got 8 85% of the country, then actually now we're interested in working with you, even though they've ignored us for many years. So with that sort of snowball effect, as you get bigger, people get interested in working with you because they feel like if they work with you, they're going to have more influence. So yeah, it's sort of grown very organically, but the key point I guess I wanted to get across is that it grew from identifying a problem with our own working environment. It wasn't what can we sell, let's make something to sell. It was what's frustrating me about my day-to-day job, how can I fix it? Aha, I've got something that makes it better, now other people are going to want this. That was the kind of the sequence. So I'm going to stop it there so we've got plenty of time for questions, but if there's anything you want to ask, please do think of it and chime in a bit.
Yeah, definitely lots of thoughts and questions coming up, I think. Stephen, over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name's Stephen. A little while ago, turn of the century, I think was the phrase that you used very kindly. I was at Abingdon. So I was here for 7 years. Had a pretty good time here. I think made a lot of very close friends. Did okay academically, and went off to Southampton University to study English. English is one of those degrees. Excuse me. English is one of those degrees where you can go and work in Waterstones if you want, or you can go and work in publishing, or you can do something completely different. So I chose the middle option, which was to go and work in publishing. So I worked in publishing in Oxford for a few years, but was afflicted by a problem where I always seemed to think that I knew better than everyone else, which is quite a dangerous idea to have if you work in any sort of business where you're working for other people, typically several layers of other people. So I did things that I thought would be the right things to do, and I could argue with a degree of sense why I thought that was the right thing to do, but sometimes it would rub people up the wrong way, and I got to the position where I thought I should probably just go and do my own thing. But I didn't, because my dad, who was manager at the time, was going through all sorts of grief in terms of people claiming quite mischievous employment tribunal things at the time. So I thought the whole idea of employing other people was just something that I didn't want to do, so I would try and find a way just to do things on my own. I didn't do things straight away, but at one point I was working with a colleague who was a picture researcher. This is for another publisher's. Her partner at the time had just launched a new website. This was a few years ago, a long time ago. He just launched a new website and showed it to me, and I said, in keeping with my previous comment, oh my God, that's worse than the last website that he had. To which she then relayed that message to her partner, and he said, okay, Stephen, if you're so clever, come and fix it. So I quit my job, my low-paying publishing job, for an even lower-paying job fixing this guy's website. I knew absolutely nothing about this, as you can probably see. Sometimes I will say things, still to this day I will say things that, well, I'll put my foot in it and then I'll have to try and adjust after the fact to make it sound as though that's what I wanted to do all along. So I ended up working for this guy, and I knew nothing about what I was doing other than trying to figure things out for myself as I went along. So I bought the Dummy's Guide to Website Design, Dummy's Guide to Search Engine Optimization, essentially getting websites to rank in Google, and started figuring things out as I went along. Luckily, I seemed to do okay at that, so I was being paid, like I say, a lower salary, but I also had a commission element to my job. So I thought, okay, I need to just make as many sales as possible through this website. It was a photo printing website, so if you want to get your photo printed on canvas, for example, they would do that. Somehow I was quite good at SEO, probably getting the Dummy's Guide to SEO helped me along the way. So we started getting a lot of traffic from Google, and sales went up quite considerably. I thought, well, I'm still being paid on commission, how can we push things up even more? And I realised that for every 100 people who come to our websites, probably 98 of them leave without buying anything. And I'm sure it's probably the same for you. You'll often go to websites, just browse whatever they have, and most of the time you don't buy something. That's the case with pretty much every website. So I thought, well, how can we, instead of only one person out of every 100 buying, how can we make it 2 people or 3 people or 4 people? So I figured there's probably reasons why they're not buying. They can't find the product that they want, it's too expensive, they're just browsing, there's no real motivation for them to buy today. So I started coming up with all these different ideas, and then basically started testing things out on the website. And when I say testing, this wasn't a kind of controlled scientific test, it was just doing things and seeing what happened, seeing if more people started buying stuff. Long story short, we increased sales 6 times over in the space of 6 months, which was not what they had in mind when they set up the commission scheme for me as an early employee. To the point where they said, Stephen, we can't pay you that commission, that's more than the MD makes. I did not have a problem with that, but apparently the MD did. So we came up with a different solution where I would start a company and they would be my first client. So their salary that they would have paid me previously essentially became their fee as a client. But instead of working full-time for them, I was working maybe 1 day a week for them. They then recommended me to lots of their other dodgy business mates. And so I started to build up a bit of a client base doing that. And that took me to about 2010, 2011, when I started making a little bit of a name for myself, doing essentially that bit where you look at a website and you see how can we fix it, and you actually do something called A/B testing. So if you do chemistry, you'll know the idea of a randomized controlled trial, where you have your control group and you have your test group, and you make no changes to the control group, and you make 1 change to the to the test group, and then you see what's the difference in performance between the two. The same principle applies on websites. You take the checkout for Domino's Pizza and you say, what would happen if we added Apple Pay, for example? 50% of people see the version without Apple Pay, 50% of people see the version with Apple Pay, and then you measure what's the difference in sales between the two. So it's you're showing 2 different versions of the website at the same time. So I started doing that, started making a bit of a name for myself because there weren't too many other people doing it at the time. And I was speaking at a conference in Seattle, where I knew that one of the other speakers was from Facebook. So the night before I was due to present at this conference, I quickly changed my presentation to make it a bit more about Facebook and a bit less about what I was going to talk about otherwise, essentially to see if I could butter them up. Sure enough, he was not only in the room at the time, he was in the front row, and he was actually speaking immediately after me. So he got in touch afterwards, tried to get me to go and work for Facebook in California, but I turned it down. Apparently that doesn't happen too often, or certainly didn't at the time. So instead they found a way to work with me, so they became one of my biggest clients. And then I grew the agency from that point forward. So I realised I couldn't do it all on my own. Unlike the lesson that I'd taken previously where I didn't want to employ people, I decided actually I need to start employing people. So I hired a couple of people in the beginning and kind of gradually built things up. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing most of the time, but kind of figuring things out as I went along, and it seemed to work out okay. And then I'll fast forward a little bit because this is probably getting a bit boring. Going through to 2019, we were approached by a fairly big digital media company. So we were only about 30 people or so at the time. They wanted to acquire us, and it was someone that I knew very well. They put a deal on the table, everything looked good, so we were going ahead with that, and we were doing something called due diligence, which is a phase where they've made an offer to buy a company, but they want to make sure that everything's legit, that we're not about to be sued, we're not about to lose our biggest client, that kind of thing. So we're just about to kick that off when I got the fateful phone call the night before saying, Stephen, we're really sorry, our bank has pulled our funding, essentially, so we're going to have to stop the deal. They said that they would be back, but they weren't sure when. It might be in 6 months' time or a year's time. Anyway, the advisors that I was using to kind of manage the transaction said, we've done all of this work to prepare for the deal, we might as well see if there are other people that are interested. So I spoke with lots and lots of different companies, of whom 3 of them were interested. 2 of them were backed by private equity, which is basically where there's a big pot of money sitting behind your company and you are essentially beholden to them as investors. And the 3rd one did not have private equity, it was still privately owned. In other words, the guy who started it still owned it. He was the one who called all of the shots. Whatever he wanted to do, we could do, and we got on really well. So I thought, brilliant, this is the guy for me. He doesn't have a private equity backer. We figured out a deal. This was 2020, so we did a deal basically on Zoom. When we met in person, we were wearing masks. It was a bit of a weird time, as I'm sure you all remember. Anyway, so we signed the deal in August 2020. Within 5 months, he'd sold to private equity, which was an interesting move, given that the reason why I chose him in the first place was the lack of private equity. Thankfully, the private equity firm are very, very good, and they're nice PE, not nasty PE, they're two different types. So I joined that company, and then as of now-ish, I'm now leading the parent company, so the company that bought us. I've now stepped into that leadership position, so instead of running Conversion.com, which was the company that I set up, I'm now running Sideshow Group. So we've got about 900 people in the company, we do about 100 million in revenue, and I'm essentially, to my earlier point, still laughing, still trying to figure things out as I go along, still recognising that there's a huge amount that I don't know that I have to try and work out as I do it and hope no one catches on to me.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. Good.
Pleasure.
Jiro.
Hi, so I'm Dira. I left Abingdon in 2021 and I'm studying business management at Bristol. I'm going to be talking to you about what I've been doing at Bristol since I left Abingdon. So I'll start off with at Abingdon. I started off having drum lessons that I sort of never turned up to, and eventually my mum was like, "Do you want to do them?" And I saw that they had music tech, like music production, and I was like, "Oh, I'll give that a go," and eventually fell in love with it. COVID hit and I had a load of free time on my hand, so got a pair of decks, started producing some tracks, and putting them out on Instagram, on SoundCloud, and just doing it. The boarding house, I had a little setup with about 4 speakers, and I just used to annoy everyone else in the boarding house. Sort of after school, I'd bring my decks to the kitchen and start mixing. I was just doing it for fun back then, but then it came to the time of A-levels and I had to pick a university to go to, and obviously I looked at all the academics and I sort of narrowed it down to Bristol because, I mean, at this point I was still in my wanting to be a DJ, famous DJ era, so I was like, I'll go down to Bristol's brilliant music scene down there. So applied to Bristol, got into Bristol, and then I had the challenge of getting my first gigs. So the way I got my first gig was actually sort of a funny story. There was someone I spoke to in the boarding house in the queue for the dining hall who just so happened to have a cousin who was a manager at a venue that was looking to start having live music and things like that. So I got put on, I sort of just got sent a text with a flyer with my name as Duro's party and it's the event, and I was like, oh, I'm DJing here and things like that. And from then on I met a bunch of other students who eventually took over running that night as an event, and from there we sort of scaled it up to the point where we were selling out the venue. We were full capacity about 9 p.m. going on until about midnight. Moving on from there, I carried on doing all my gigs around Bristol, and then I thought to myself, oh, I enjoy doing the gigs, but I'd like to do something a little bit more concrete, a little bit more on the managerial side. So me and my friends tried to launch our own event this February. Actually, we had a date for February, and then we hit some setbacks with the venue. Basically, a bigger promoter came in and sort of bullied us out of our spot. So we were left. We booked everything down to the sound techs, booked all the equipment that we were going to use, and we just hit a complete rump. We didn't know what to do. We couldn't find any other venue in time to redo this event, and then that's when I got approached by another person just from word of mouth, being known for my music, and got asked to take over a very sort of prestigious event in Bristol. It was called Bed Mondays, and it had been running for about 18 years, and it's just been a Monday night event, and they had the issue of having low ticket sales, so they got pushed out of the venue that they had. The name of the venue was Gravity. So they came to us students, it was sort of a team of 4 of us, and we're all sort of friends, and we all do our music together. And we got asked to we were basically treated as like consultants for them, and seeing how we can help them rebrand this event. The problem was it sort of stayed the same for the whole 15 years. Back when you'd have sort of reps that would hand you tickets out in person, but everything is now like digital, but they were still using methods like that, and they needed to get updated. So we got given the task of sort of rebranding this event, and so we gave it a go, completely with the new venue, changed everything, changed the artwork down to completely restructured the brand and changed the music policy and everything like that. And it sort of did work for the first 2 weeks of the event, and then numbers started dwindling again. And so we were like, all right, we need to think back, and we just thought to ourselves, what gap is there in the market in Bristol? And I thought back to when I was sort of coming into Bristol and I needed gigs. I wanted to get my first gig playing the club for the first time, and so we came up with the idea that we'd have Free to Dance that would support local DJs. The name of the event is Free to Dance, and the whole idea is the whole idea of it is to help support local DJs. So we book a big headliner DJ to sort of get people in, and then we host a mix series with local DJs that just send us a message on our accounts or send us an email with their tracks. We then give them a platform we record their mixes for them, give them a slot at a gig so they can start growing themselves as a person. I think one reason I sort of really enjoy this, because it's sort of taken a hobby that I had back at school that I just used to do for fun. Some of the teachers can vouch for me when I was just sort of known as, oh, that's Dura, the guy that DJs, and like now I'm sort of doing what I really enjoy down in Bristol, and it's almost like it's not really anything. It doesn't feel like it's like any work or anything like that. And I think it's just it's really great how this little hobby that I had back in school has now grown into something that I can sort of do more like more professionally in a way, and sort of can make it sort of my own thing. It's quite like fulfilling in a way. I feel like I've sort of started to achieve what I sort of wanted to do. It makes me feel like quite independent in a way. It's pretty fun doing all the events, things like that, but it is also quite stressful. So like Mr. Gray mentioned earlier, in Bristol all the clubs are sort of spread out. You have the Stoke Bishop side, and then you have like the city centre areas, and you'd be surprised how much of a difference a 10-minute walk could make to your attendance, because I mean all uni students are just very kind of lazy. So we had the distance between the old venue and the new venue is sort of about a 10-minute walk, and our engagement dropped about 80 minutes when the word got out that we'd moved 10 minutes down the street. So now we have the task of finding a completely new set of people to go to our event, because we used to target a sort of the North Residential Village of the University of Bristol, so a sort of a group of halls and accommodations. About 3,000 students were our main clientele, but now we were further away than the uni bus took us to them, so we had to find these new people, and they didn't know the history of Bed Mondays, like the 18 years it's been running about. It's a completely new thing, and now we have to try and get people down. We had our first relaunch of the Free to Dance event last night, and it wasn't exactly what we hoped for, but it is expected with these things. It's the first event. We've had about 2 weeks of promoting it, and we didn't sell out the venue, but we got enough people in to just about break even on our tickets. And so next week next week we're completely changing the date again from a Wednesday to Thursday night, because again the day of the week really does matter to uni students. If there's an event on Tuesday that's fairly popular, you're not going to get anyone out on a Wednesday, or if there's something special going on the weekend, no one's going to want to go out on the week. So you have to be taking this into account. So constantly on your toes, constantly looking at what's going on around Bristol, and just sort of bouncing off that really. I mean, for you guys now at Abingdon, I'd really say that you should definitely take advantage of all the opportunities that you have now. I mean, really honing on your whatever your hobby is, whatever your thing is, whatever you find interesting, no matter how embarrassing it might feel at the time or how like uncool you may think it is. I really think you should carry on with it and connect with people who are like-minded, because you never know how far some little hobby can get you. Yeah.
That's great, thank you. So we're going to go to question session now, so please do get your questions lined up. Jiro, I was just thinking as you were speaking there, you were saying it was a hobby at Abingdon in the sixth form, then you kind of took it up as an entrepreneur at university. I think Mr. Richardson and I, as your business studies teachers, thinking back to you at the time when you were an A-level student, you really did sort of take the kind of business ideas we have to teach you to pass the exam, and you really pull it apart, in terms of like that entrepreneurial idea and how I can make use of it. But one of the things you were saying to me is about there's this opportunity you get maybe at university, which is maybe kind of a school for entrepreneurs where the risks are lowered a bit. Yeah. And it would be good for you to share with these guys to take more advantage of that kind of opportunity to be an entrepreneur at university. Yeah. And how do they support you? How do they lower the risks for you?
So I'll give an example. So obviously I mentioned that we tried to run our own event, and that would have been us taking up all the risk, and it would have been completely on us. Whereas now I'm sort of a contractor for someone else, and I'm running his own event, so he takes up on all the risk, and he trusts us because we're cool uni students, and he thinks we know what's in fashion and trendy, and so now I can sort of get all the trial experience of running someone else's event without actually making my event look bad. I mean, I know that doesn't sound great, but that's one way in uni you can sort of take on less risk for yourself. I mean, you do really have an opportunity to meet some people who believe in you and sort of basically give you the opportunity to show them what you can really do. Yeah.
Okay, good. So we're going to go to questions. If you could say your name, and the microphone may not pick up your question, so I'll do my best to hear what you're saying and repeat the question. I might have to ask people here to help as well, as my hearing's not always the best sometimes. Okay, so question. Yeah, we'll start here at the back.
Hi, Simon Thomas, Chartered Accountant, Ridgefield Consulting. I actually run my own company as well. I've done it for 12 years. Stephen, just interested to know when you, in fact, Duro mentioned like he actually feels like he's not at work sometimes in what he's doing now. Stephen, when you were perhaps running as a conversion, it was your own baby, your own thing presumably, but now you're at the parent company and you're now responsible to other shareholders that may or may not be you, not sure, but maybe the private equity company. How does it feel now in terms of that sort of? Does it feel different now that you're not working? And then the second part of that is, did you have the option to go on a beach for 6 months and then set up another company and start again from scratch?
So Simon's asking about being an entrepreneur, living your hobby. Then you're thinking about as an entrepreneur, it's a lot of hard work, and how can you pack your parachute and leave? And the staging post might be that leadership role. And how it feels, that change, that transition, maybe the loss of control, but of course behind the scenes there's you've been in effect, I don't know if the right language, bought out, and with that can come some nice financial strings. So there's all that kind of mingled together, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. There is a difference in the two phases. So running my own company, it was definitely at times hugely stressful. I was lucky that I enjoyed what I was doing. I enjoyed the work. It felt like a bit of a game. We'd work for Domino's or Deliveroo or whoever, and we'd come up with ideas to say, okay, we think this website would be better, or this app would be better if we did X, and then we'll test it and we'll see if we're right or not. So it was quite enjoyable doing that. It's very different now for two respects. One, there's the level of risk is much lower, because obviously I've sold the business, so I've made a an amount of money from doing that. But secondly, also the nature of my focus has shifted from a subject that I knew a lot about to essentially being more in a management position today. And I think to your initial question, it absolutely does feel like work every single day, including on the weekends as well often. But it can be very, very rewarding as well. And I think the number one thing that I would that I've learned over that period, or that's changed, is the idea of resilience. In that when it was my own company, you would feel every knock. So if a client quit, or if a member of staff handed in their notice, and these are inevitable things that will always happen in any business like ours. But certainly for the first kind of 5, 6, 7 years, you'd feel it really personally. It's not to say that I don't care anymore, because I absolutely do, but I think there's a degree of pragmatism now where you have built up that kind of that experience, that scar tissue, and so you've got that that level of resilience, meaning that when things go wrong, it's ultimately not typically the end of the world, and it's obviously much easier to be in a position that I am today to be able to say that, of course.
Yeah. And Merlin, do you feel as you've got bigger, you're moving from being kind of entrepreneurialism to more leadership? Or?
Yes, I mean, when I started, I was still a full-time GP partner. Now I do one morning a week as a GP just to keep my licence going, but it's more than a full-time job. But I think what you said about enjoying, it's definitely, it doesn't feel the same sense of dread of going to work that I was feeling doing medicine. It feels like it's a challenge, and it's not actually any less hard work, but it's just, it's enjoyable. Everything is, everything's difficult. Like Stephen says, you're going to get knocks, but it's about accepting that that's part of it, and that not every knock is because you've done something wrong. And I think the biggest learning thing for me is the fact that, Stephen was saying how he feels like he doesn't know what he's doing half the time, and it's sort of feeling his way a bit. And what struck me about the fact of growing this business is that, I felt exactly that same kind of imposter syndrome, but then actually you put your feelers out and you realise that no one has done what you're trying to do before. So it is you are trying to find a new path, and that's kind of challenging and also exhilarating at the same time. So if you're if you like problem solving, then having some meaty problems to solve is good.
Yeah, and Jura, you're kind of living the hobby, living the dream, kind of, hopefully. But is there that profit incentive for you? Do you see yourself in 20, 30 years where you made this large amount of money, and as Simon said, you're having nice time on the beach and so on? Where's the balance there?
There is 100% a profit incentive. I'm a student and I need to get by. So I do want to make obviously a considerable amount of money in the future, but at the same time, I wouldn't mind if I didn't, because I do just enjoy doing this. I find it very exciting, sort of just the whole hustle and bustle of it, just being involved in the aspect of seeing it from the aspect of a music producer or as a DJ, and also seeing it from the side of running the entire event as well. I just find it also how it all sort of interlinks. I find it quite fascinating and just interesting. So, yeah.
Great. Okay, can I go to another question? Yeah, Rafi.
I've got a question for you, Merlin. You said in your first year you only had 2 clients, and then you ended up growing to 85% is the figure you used. Normally when you have a product, you market it, try and grow it as that. How did you end up doing it? Because you work more with medicine and stuff like that, so that's interesting for me.
Yeah,
So if in case people didn't hear, Rafi, you said about basically how you grow the business and the challenges that comes along with, I guess, as well.
Yeah, so GPs are a hard bunch to sell to because they've not got any time, they don't read emails, they don't look at adverts. So the way we did it was really by providing as good a service as we possibly could and being impossibly responsive to our customers so that they told their mates down the road, and also by providing a financial incentive. So I won't bore you the detail, but that we could prove to them that we were making them more money. and the subscription cost that we were charging them for the service was so low, and we would guarantee it. So we would tell them that if we don't make you at least as much money as you're paying, we will refund you the difference, because we were confident enough in it. And I think we needed to do that about 5 times in the last 10 years. So the guarantee worked out because we were able to quite clearly and rationally explain to people there was no financial risk to taking it on a trial basis. And then of course, because it's a subscription, once people are hooked in, if they like it and you're providing this amazing customer service, then they've got no incentive to then end their subscription. And so, yeah, it was hard work. You know, we didn't do marketing in the sense of putting adverts, because where do you put an advert to get GPs to look at it? They don't. But we did do stuff like going to trade conferences and taking a stand there, and then, you know, people that were coming by, you then, you know, oh, have you seen this? Show them, and then they, oh, that's a no-brainer. I'll try it. And so there was an organic growth. We didn't spend a lot on marketing, and then once it hits a certain threshold, it's really difficult to know at what point that happened, but there was a certain point when suddenly it was a sort of, you felt like you got over this hump, and suddenly the amount of people spreading the word was so much that you just literally didn't need to bother, because you're fending off the customers rather than going looking for them. There's a sort of tipping point, but yeah, it was an uphill battle to that point.
Yeah, I was reading about Tesla in China and how they've not got a marketing budget. They just use that reputation, that word of mouth. So, yeah. Juro, is there barriers? Have you found barriers to enterprise? I mean, what if all these Bristol venues came knocking on your door and said, "We want you"?
Oh.
How do you deal with that sort of?
Well, one thing I did find, especially when we tried to run our own event, was just how difficult it was to even for a venue to even let you throw an event there. I thought if you could muster up all the money you needed, and they'd sort of just say yes, but no, you needed turns out you need to know sort of a lot of people, and they can sort of vouch for you, and even then it's up to the venue manager if they want to give you a good slot. So it's definitely difficult to get into, but once you sort of got your foot through, it then opens up a world of endless opportunities. So now we're running this free to dance event. I mean, we've still got our own brand. It's called The Shed, that we've sort of just kept on lock on the side. That we've got we're in talks with some certain venues, but trying to get this one, the current one, up to good scratch, and then launch ours off of that, basically, with a collaboration event.
Yeah.
Use the reputation of that.
And Stephen, in terms of challenges of growth and barriers to entrepreneurship?
I think the point that Merlin made in terms of having a guarantee is really important and often overlooked, because typically people might think about what is their business's USP, what is our business about, what do we do differently, why should you choose us? And if you can translate that into a meaningful guarantee, then it becomes significantly more powerful. You know, like I think I seem to be using a lot of pizza examples today, but I think Domino's had a guarantee back in the day, which was you get the pizza in 20 minutes or it's free. For us at Conversion, we would do similar guarantees about return on investment. In other words, if you come and work with us as a client, then we will guarantee that you'll pay us X and we'll make you 5x, 10x in the first year, for example. So we put guarantees in place around that, and that certainly helped. I think the number one thing that helped us scale was the fact that we ultimately were good at what we did, and word of mouth drove our business for the first 10 years at least. And if you have that, then everything else becomes much easier, because it can be very expensive to focus on sales and marketing and to grow that way. It's much easier when you've got a bit of a flywheel spinning to then scale it from that position.
Okay, can I go again? Yeah.
Hi, Edward Anderson, I'm a planner at Savills. It's a question from Merlin. So while you're in practice, how did you go about raising capital? What did you rely on your own kind of skill set to develop that infrastructure? And then the second thing is, obviously you're in a 9 to 5 or probably longer hours as you're a GP. How did you work around that time element to develop your...
So Edward, you're asking about how you raise finance and time.
And the balance
Yeah.
between 9 to 5 and your...
So, I mean, we were very fortunate. We didn't raise capital. We had start-up costs of 100 quid each, I think, to incorporate the company. But because we were effectively building it for our own use and selling it secondarily, it was as I say, it was a sort of hobby business to start with. So there wasn't a huge sort of investment round. There was no huge development cost to it. In terms of the personal toll, yeah, I mean, it's a nightmare. There's no two ways about it. You know, a GP day was sort of 8 till 6, and then I would come to work in Abingdon Hospital in the evening, which was where the company was born. But if I hadn't come and met Miles, we probably never would have set the company up. So, but yeah, I mean, you just have to be prepared to put the graft in, and I think that's what I was saying about the sort of the hump. You've got to sort of prepare yourself for the fact that it is going to be an uphill struggle, whatever you do. But if you've got enough faith in what you're doing, and the customers are telling you good things, and that's why I think it's really critical, this thing about, like Stephen said, with the guarantee, yeah, great, that helps sales, but actually you can sell a load of stuff, but then if people don't get the service, they're going to sort of de-adopt you very quickly. You need to provide something that is so utterly impossible to do without, and the service so responsive that people just can't imagine how they manage without it. And that comes at a high personal cost. I mean, I guess we could have invested a lot and employed a whole load of people from the offing, but then we would have had a huge debt to service. We chose to build it in a much more tentative way, but we had to do all the work. And I'll admit, you know, it got to, I don't know, second or third year, and we were really frazzled, and that's the point at which we employed people. But the problem is, I don't know if you've heard of this thing, the entrepreneur's paradox. You don't believe anyone else can do the job as well as you, so you hold off employing somebody, and then as soon as you get the first person, they do a better job than you would have done. It's like, why the hell didn't I do that earlier? You know, I've been killing myself for a year. And so yeah, it was really tough. You know, I used to be on my laptop doing, you know, 2 things at once, cooking dinner or, you know, changing babies or whatever, whilst doing stuff at home right until bed, and weekends and still, I mean, it's still, you know, having your own company full stop and being a director of it, you have to be prepared to work at weekends, but having decent staff now means that I'm not beholden to it literally every evening, every weekend. But, you know, that's a choice we took. I guess if you raise a load of capital, you might be able to offset some of that.
So that's a nice tip, that idea, in terms of how you deal with workload and the long hours. Because something that we do in classes for entrepreneurs as characteristics is you have to be that tenacious, you have to put in those long hours, and like you say, getting over that hump. I don't know if Stephen or Duro, you could say a little bit about sources of funding or any ideas about how you overcome this hump of getting up and started as business.
Well, a lot of the funding, our funding, sort of comes from, we have a owner, and he's been running events for, say, 20 years, so for some reason he seems to trust a bunch of students with the cash to throw events. I don't know why. But yeah, I mean, obviously, if we end up turning a profit, that means we have more money to then make the event the week after better. And I mean, especially now that we're just launching a load of smaller brands, a load of different events, there has been a case of spending a load of money, sort of just promotional materials, handing out free tickets, giving out free drinks, buying lots of posters that students would want to hang up in their rooms, so you need to print really nice stuff, and as well as that. And there are a lot of costs, but I think it is worth it in order to really captivate the market. Because once the night is sort of established, there's like in the way it sort of works in Bristol is each day of the week has sort of their own event. So on a Monday night, you know, there was this at Gravity. On a Tuesday, you'd know there was something going on at Lakota. Once it's established, then it sort of just tends to lead or go on. It's established, and it's sort of the go-to for the rest of the year. But actually establishing yourself as like the event on that day, and getting that spot is very, very difficult, and sort of requires a lot of a lot of different partnerships, basically.
But is it manageable to be being a student at university full time and then doing the business on top?
Well, it's a quite big team. There's about we've got our sort of managers. We manage sort of our reps and we help with the decisions. And we've got the venue manager, the director, and the owner as well above us. In terms of balancing it, it is a lot of work, especially when we check our metrics and it's just low ticket sales for the point of the week is where we are, and then that means you have to sort of drop everything and just start going out. I mean, when all else fails, if none of the marketing, the ads, everything's working, we just print out about 1,000 flyers, just go around the town, and so I do need to be available to do that. It does take up a lot of my time, but luckily my course is mostly coursework, so I do find time to sort of just read my notes, rewatch my lectures, and write my essays.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult balance, but I don't mind staying up extra late and doing something because I enjoy it. I find it quite fulfilling.
So having a good team around you, but doing business is about graft. It's about picking up the phone or handing out the leaflets, as you said. Okay, so sources of funding and tips of workloads.
Yeah, so we never raised any finance. We never needed to. I think we were lucky in that I started out doing a service business, a marketing agency essentially. So if you have a client, then they pay you money and all you're spending is your time. You don't have to buy any materials other than a laptop. So that made it very easy to get started. The one thing that it did require was quite a strict amount of cost control, so essentially being very, very careful about every penny that you spend. So it can be very tempting if you set up a business to think, okay, we need a logo, we need business cards, and I'm literally still using today headed paper which I thought I needed that I bought 15 years ago. It was very nice, but I just use it as blank paper now. So it's very easy to kind of get carried away and think you need to spend money on things that you don't. It's much better to have that diligence about not spending money on things that you don't have to, which is a good habit to be in today. And in terms of managing the workload, I mean, I think you're probably getting the impression that all of us will spend time, late nights, weekends, where we're investing a significant amount of time doing it. So it really underlines that point from a minute ago in terms of enjoying what you do. There's no point setting up a business that you think you're going to be able to sell for a lot of money if you don't actually enjoy doing it in the first place, because otherwise you're just going to make yourself very tired and very miserable, and you're probably going to have a hard time in selling it as well. There's a very nice analogy, which I'm probably going to misquote, but there's a made-up story about an American lawyer, I think it was, who goes on holiday to Belize, and every day of his holiday he goes out fishing with this fisherman tour guide, and he sees the amount of fish that this guy catches every single day, and the American lawyer says to him, hey, you know what you should do? You should, when you sell all of this fish, you should start employing someone else, and they could get a boat as well. And the guy says, okay, so why would I do that? And the lawyer says, well, if you have 2 boats, then you could catch twice as many fish, you'd make even more money, and then you could get a third, even bigger boat, and then start catching yet more fish, and then you can start supplying all of these different people all over Belize. And the fisherman says, yeah, why would I do that? And the lawyer says, well, if you keep on doing that, and if you can work long enough and hard enough, you'll get to a point where you can finally sell that business and make a lot of money. And the fisherman says, okay, and then what would I do? And the lawyer says, well, then you can take all of that money and then sit on a beach and go fishing every day. So the idea is that if you figure out what it is that you're passionate about and focus on that. The money itself should ultimately be irrelevant, but it's a massive benefit if you find something that is that can be financially worthwhile at the same time. If the two overlap, you're in luck.
Okay, another question. Yes.
My question is for you, Stephen. So you were discussing about how there are risks of failing businesses and how many entrepreneurs, they can't attract many customers. But what do you think is the biggest mistake that entrepreneurs generally make?
Okay, what's your name?
Aaron.
Aaron. So Aaron, you've asked about understanding risk. What was it, the biggest mistake you made?
That entrepreneurs usually make.
Or entrepreneurs usually make, yes. Okay.
That's a very easy one. The biggest mistake is not talking to your customers or not talking to them enough. I think you've probably got an idea from all of us, talking to people on the streets, handing out flyers, talking to doctors. For me, I think the idea of understanding your customer is obviously, everyone talks about understanding your customer. The problem is, especially for introverts like myself, it can be very tempting to say, well, we've got all this analytics data, we can see exactly what our customers are doing, we can run surveys and they can tell us what they're thinking. But actually, if you go out and talk to people and really get inside their head and find out what is keeping doctors up at night, what's stopping people going to different events, is the extra 8-minute, 10-minute walk making all the difference? If you can understand your customers and understand their problems, then you can start to fix them. And if you've got enough people with the same problem, that's where you make a lot of money. I think that the challenge that most people have is that it's very easy not to do that. It's very easy to think that you know it all, or to think that you take a little bit of data and you extrapolate that into a whole kind of marketing campaign, but actually nothing replaces going out and talking to the customer.
Do you have anything to add? No. Merlin?
Duro, can I ask you, because I used to think, I did a bit of DJing back in my youth, and I used to think, on this theme, but I used to think, if you play your own music, you'll clear the dance floor. I.e., on the point of this chap's question, if you do something that you think is a good idea, it probably might not be. You actually need to find the pain points of the customer and what they actually need.
So how do you anticipate risk or uncertainty, like COVID breaking out?
Okay. I mean, I guess our biggest sort of risk is that no one turns up, and well, in the context of even last night, because the numbers weren't so great, just about got enough people in, but that was a case of we were monitoring all the our ticketing platforms, seeing if people were buying them on the door, counting how many people were coming in per like half an hour, and then when we saw that it wasn't looking like we were gonna go, we sort of all went out on foot to all the pubs in the area with a bunch of flyers, handed them out, and that managed to get our numbers up to just to the point where we weren't like taking a massive loss. So I think in terms of risk, I think you certainly need to constantly be thinking ahead of what potential problems might arise, and coming up with ways of mitigating that well beforehand. So we already knew that tickets weren't going to be might not be great, so we already knew that we needed flyers on hand so we can go at maybe 11:30 to the different venues and try and get that little bit extra. So yeah, I think just planning so you can mitigate later down the line, really.
Okay, Merlin?
I'd agree. I mean, you can't predict COVID, but you can have business resilient plans, like Stephen was talking about, personal resilience. The bigger the business gets, the more that we find. So we went from 2 of us to we've got 110 or something now. So the whole shape of the business changes. We have to anticipate someone leaving. With COVID, we just got an office. We'd all worked remotely before, and then we just got an office, and then COVID hit. So it's quite easy, really. We just bought a few more laptops for the people that we bought desktops for, and then moved back to working remotely. But now we have infrastructure that can cope with more things, and I guess you can't put all that in place at square one because you haven't got the budget, but you need to sort of anticipate the next step and plan for what might happen within reason. I think that's the best you can do. You can't mitigate the risk.
Okay, another question? Yes.
Hello. I'm just wondering, it's really hard to do your own business, and I want to hear the story about the darkest moment you've experienced and how you conquer that challenge.
Can you say the first? How you?
Three of you have experienced some big dark moment. The biggest challenge possibly is about thinking of I might fail. How you conquer that. I know, that's going to be the challenge.
Yeah, so the biggest challenge you face and how you get through that, how you conquer that.
Yeah, have you ever, thought about I might actually fail, maybe my business is not going to work?
Yeah.
But what's the tip point actually, or anything happened that helped you to conquer that?
So Jura, you're starting out, but I guess first
okay.
night, I don't know.
Yeah, so about 4 weeks ago we had the rebranding of Bed Mondays, and we sort of said 3 weeks we were going to see if tickets were going up. So we started somewhat in the middle capacity for the venue, and then the week after it went down by like another 50, and then it got to the third week. And normally we get most of our ticket sales on the day of the event because it's mostly people bored looking for something to do, and they go. But we should, if the venue capacity we have put out about 1.3k tickets. Venue capacity is about 700, but a lot of people don't actually turn up, and maybe I think about 2-3 days beforehand we should be around 100-200 tickets, and we got a message on the WhatsApp and it said ticket sales 6 across 8 different platforms, and I was like, oh, I'm out. This is like me done. And then so we scheduled an emergency meeting, and we were like, yeah, this isn't working. I mean, obviously if people aren't, the whole point we're trying to get repeat people in, and if our numbers are going down, then obviously we're not doing that. So we cancelled the event. I think we said the building was flooded to get out of it, and we got a second chance at it, because I mean, with these things it's very much a case of finding what works. The previous model wasn't working, so tried another one, that didn't work, so we're trying another one, because I mean, we know that the market's there, it's just finding what people want. And I think the best way is trial and error, because previous things just weren't working. So yeah, that was, I think, the scariest thing I've seen so far. Just 6 tickets, which is it's just really, really, really bad. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is a fascinating area, isn't it? It's something, about the bounce back ability of entrepreneurs. Often we hear that they've gone through 2 or 3 failed businesses and bankruptcy, and they've got through it. So yeah, Stephen, what if you could pick up on that?
Yeah, absolutely. There have been. I was trying to think while Jura was talking. I was trying to think of what were the darkest times that I've been through, and there have been so many. But the thing is that none of them really stand out. You lose an employee and you think, how can we ever continue without X? Or we lose a client, or the client hasn't paid their invoice in the last 3 months, and then they go bankrupt. And the point that I always remind myself of is ultimately, what's the worst that could happen? Sometimes it can be quite beneficial to be a little bit nihilistic about it, as in everyone in this room one day will turn into dust, essentially. And the worst that could happen in a business, the business doesn't work. It's not the end of the world. Most people in this room, if they start up a business and it doesn't work, they will probably get a job, and they'll probably get a job relatively easily. It's important to retain that perspective, but in the moment it's very easy to lose it when you're waking up at 2 in the morning and your brain has not switched off, and you're just constantly churning, thinking about work and worrying about 5 different things and trying to fix them. It happens. I think for me it happened way more before than it does now, because I think, like we were saying, over time you build up that degree of resilience. There's a very good book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. The first half of it is very good, the second half tells off a bit. but it talks about the struggles that the author went through, and you think, oh my God, my problems were nothing compared to that. It helps to put things in perspective. But again, ask yourself what the worst is that can happen, and give that a go.
Yeah,
Fairly informal advice.
Merlin.
But yeah, I think it is perspective, because I come from an industry where the worst thing that could happen is someone dies if you screw up. So for me, you know, something happens in the business, well, yeah, it's not great, but no one dies most of the time, you know. I think the thing for us though, on a serious note, is that, you know, we are now dealing with, not directly, but we're dealing with the infrastructure for 50 million patients. So in a sense, the level of involvement with an individual patient is none, but the level of responsibility is ratcheted up, because if we make a mistake, it's multiplied up now. So it's a different sort of thing. But I think, like Stephen says, you get used to the fact that what you're doing is trying to improve people's status quo. You're not trying to make it perfect. Well, you might be trying to, but you're not going to. So actually, to take a step back and go, hang on a minute, what's really happened here? Oh, an important member of staff has left. Well, that's not the end of the world. They are, you know, somebody else can in time be trained up to do that job. It might cause a hiccup, it might cause some difficulty, but it's not what it feels like when you're lying awake at 2 in the morning because it's happened that day. So it's a bit like all sorts of things that happen in your life, bereavement or all sorts of things. You know, they're raw, but with time it does get easier and you get used to strategies for dealing with it. But yeah, you've got to be prepared for it. Okay,
so we've got about another quarter of an hour of questions, and we'll go to refreshments. There'll be a chance to talk more informally. Timothy.
This question is for Brittany. So you probably encountered loads of different people to work with. How did you find starting out by yourself to moving with working with other people? Have you met any difficult characters to work with, and how did you push through that?
So they're brothers, if you didn't know. You put you on the spot there. So starting out in business, and you start out by yourself, that's easy, and then you have to start to employ people. I suppose classic cases in the back of your head might have been partnership problems. So, you know, I guess you don't have to get into a legal tied partnership, and getting out of that could be worse than a divorce, from what we hear. How do you deal with people that maybe don't quite connect with in the end?
I mean, 100% you're going to, especially from leaving Abingdon and going to uni, it was sort of eye-opening how different everyone sort of was. You sort of need to I think, carry yourself well and always be understanding of everyone. Not everyone thinks the same way you do or understands things the same way you do. So I think you always need to sort of keep that in mind when you're interacting with people. From moving to working with myself to working with others, I mean, I tend to be quite loud, and I like to speak up, and like he's been saying, thinking I'm the only one that can do anything, right, I sort of think like that, and in my mind, just especially when I'm talking with someone new, I always just keep in the back of my mind, like, oh, you need to actually listen to what they're saying, like you're not you don't know everything, you don't know, you're not the perfect entrepreneur or whatever it is, and I think that really helps me to I don't know, sort of form better relationships with everyone. Just this sort of like putting my ego to the side and just sometimes just listening and being kind, of course, and being understanding. I think that has really helped me to really navigate some really tricky people, I'd say.
Yeah. And Merlin, I mean, you've got your business, but you've also got GPs, you've got dealing with the government as well.
Yeah, government's not easy to do. No, but I mean, I think in a way we're protected now because we're dealing with, on the whole, quite a reasonable bunch of people. I think it is difficult dealing with difficult people, but yeah, it's you have to sometimes just, like you say, listen to what they, hear them out and work out a way forward. But often it's just people want to be listened to. It's not actually you've got to do much. I mean, it reminds me actually of clinical situation with somebody that came to see me and just gave me the most horrendous catalogue of life events which you wouldn't wish on anyone. You know, they'd had people die in the family, their pets had been run over, they'd lost their house, they had some financial disaster. And I was sitting there in sort of stunned silence as the doctor, thinking, well, there's no medical problem here, there's nothing I can do for this poor person, but oh my God, how awful. And then I was just literally silent for about a minute, and then this lady stood up and went, oh, thanks so much, doctor, I feel loads better. And that was it. And that was all she just wanted to tell me, and that was all that was required, which I thought was really interesting, because being a bloke and being a problem solver, I was ready to solve the problem.
Like Stephen, in your early days, you gave that sense of like enjoying being your own boss. And then, yeah, how's it? You had that situation then when you're starting to work with people that.
Yeah, I'd recommend 2 books. One was written a long time ago, called How to Make Friends and Influence People, by Dale Carnegie. I think I read that within the first couple of months of starting up the business. I mean, it's as relevant today as it was. It was written 50, 60, 70 years ago. It's essentially about how to develop your interpersonal skills, which obviously I needed at the time. But it's incredibly valuable as a book in terms of the techniques to, as Merlin says, to help listen to and understand people and make them feel heard and understood. The second book that I'd recommend, and I don't know the extent to which you study this as part of school, is Negotiation as a Discipline in its own right. Because negotiation is one of the most underrated skills. Everyone thinks they can negotiate. Everyone thinks that they can negotiate, but in practice, when they are put on the spot, they often can't. And then once the deal is done, it is obviously very, very difficult to walk away from that. So there's a book called Everything is Negotiable, which I very highly recommend. Or any modern book on negotiation as well would be highly beneficial to really improve that aspect.
Okay, I know you've been waiting for a while, so could you say your name and your question?
My name is Anton. First, thank you very much for sharing your journey and stories. My first question is, looking into yourself, if you only pick one quality, what is the most important quality brought you to where you are? And from that angle, the second question is to the young people sitting down here today, from develop themselves. So what advice will you give to them?
So, what was your most important quality as an entrepreneur? I guess we're into characteristics and skills.
Yeah.
And what advice you'd give young people today as a result? So, who wants to go first? So.
Jump in.
Yeah.
In terms of I'll jump in and I'll use the same answer for both questions and be sneaky. The advice that I've given, the number one thing that I've learned is often there's a misconception about people who work in business that you have to be a bit of an arsehole and you have to be tough, and people will trot out the phrase, oh, it's only business, and they use that as an excuse to screw you over. And I think TV programs like Dragon's Den, it's maybe not so bad, but certainly The Apprentice, it gives you the impression that you have to be a bit of a tosser to do well in business. And absolutely that can work. But in practice...
You want to lift home, do you?
In practice, one thing that has worked, this is completely undermining the point that I was about to make. The point that I would want to emphasise is you obviously don't have to be like that. I would recommend that you, if you do start a business, you run that business in a way that would make your mother proud. It's kind of how I look at it, as in you don't look to screw people over. If you're doing a deal with someone, you don't take advantage the same way that, when for us at Conversion, when COVID hit and we had to close our office, we were going through the sale process at the time, so every pound we spent was worth many pounds in terms of the deal, but we kept a number of our contracts ongoing, so we continued to pay our cleaner, for example, all through COVID. We looked after clients even if they couldn't pay us. We wanted to do the right thing throughout, not in the hope that at some point in the future it might benefit us somehow, but just simply because it was the right thing to do. I don't like the idea that if you work in business, you have to do it in a way that screws over other people. I think there's some the whole idea of B Corp as a movement is really interesting in terms of how can you use business to support a more sustainable way of working, both for people and for the environment as well. So, one answer for the 2 questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you. Merlin, Juro?
So I think it's the same thing as well. I would say tenacity. My wife would call it obsessiveness. So if I get something in my head, I'm going to go for it. But not on a whim. You know, I'll think about it first, but once I've decided, then I'm going to go for it. And tenacity is really important if you're doing a startup type business, because you are going to have discouragement and dark moments, and you are going to have times when it's like, oh, why am I giving up all this time for something that's not making any money and whatever. But as Juro said, if you're enjoying it, that's one sort of thing that helps you, but also just that kind of that confidence, that drive that made you do it in the first place. You know, that's why it's so important. We've all been saying you've got to enjoy it, because that's what takes you forward. But the tenacity is a sort of characteristic that I think I hear from lots of people who've done the startup business, is you've got to stick with it and have confidence in yourself, because there are loads of things that I've encountered which I thought there'd be an answer to, and then you ask all the people that you think should have the answers, and no one knows the answer, and then you have to work out the answer, and then it feels twice as satisfying when you get over it. But it's can be discouraging at the time.
Yeah, one skill I think that's really helped me, I'd say, was sort of people skills and knowing how to interact with people and treat people, communicate with people. Because the reality is you're going to meet a load of different people from different backgrounds and different upbringings, and I think understanding how to speak to other people in a way that doesn't come across as condescending and really communicate, I think really is really important, because you can learn a lot from very small conversations with people, and I think that has helped me to sort of round myself off and on the edges just from interacting with everyone down the line. So I'd say people skills, because there's a lot to learn from everyone and everyone around you, really.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, I think we've got time for one last question. I know you've been waiting for a while, so I'll have your name and your question.
My name's Matt. A question for Stephen. Would you say it's more difficult to start a company now, if they're already sort of big multinational companies, especially in tech, and challenges that faces? And would you say you ever sort of regret joining a bigger company, or do you think that sort of what would happen if you just kept going to start a company?
So Matt, what's your name? And is it more difficult to start a company now? That's a really good one. And perhaps from next month, when it was a corporation tax goes to 25% as well. And the second part was about.
Do you ever sort of regret joining a bigger company?
Any regrets? Yeah. Are you still an entrepreneur? Do you regret leaving an entrepreneur and becoming a leader?
The first question, is it harder to start a business today? No, is the short answer. There's a huge amount that makes it much easier to start a business today. If you want to start an e-commerce business, you can spin something up in Shopify tonight, if you wanted to. If you wanted to incorporate a new company or start a business, and you've got all of the software and automations available to you to make it much, much easier. So it's getting easier all the time. I certainly wouldn't let big tech companies put you off. If anything, the problem that most big tech companies have is that they are too big, that they are very slow. They're like the kind of proverbial big tanker in the sea trying to turn around, whereas you can be a speedboat and you can go identify those new opportunities and get there far quicker than anyone else can. So it's much easier to start a business today and to spin something up, see if it works. If it does, double down on it. If it doesn't, try something new. yes, you're absolutely in a much better position than people have been in the past. Second question, do I regret being a corporate sellout? No. It's very hard for me being a kind of naturally indecisive person. I mean, I literally built a business around not having to make a decision because I can A/B test two different outcomes and my decision doesn't come into it. But there is a degree of, what would have happened if, I sold my business literally during COVID. What if I held on for another 3 years? Could we have got a bigger valuation for the company? Maybe we could, or maybe the world could have gone even more down the toilet than it did at the time, for example. It's very hard to make that call. I tend to think that one of the other principles that I like to think of is to, whatever position that we're in, whatever bad news we get, whatever seems to happen to us, is to essentially respond with the word good, and let's see how we can turn that into our advantage. So to the point a minute ago, our number one salesperson just quit. Good. That means we can do X, Y, and Z. So not sure quite how I got onto that part when talking about the corporate setup bit, but I think the long story short is no, I absolutely don't regret. I turn every situation that I can to I don't want to say my advantage because that makes it sound very selfish, which is completely contradictory to the previous point I made, but turn it into the best possible position.
Merlin, do you see barriers to setting up a business in the UK in 2023? Are they going up? Are they going down?
No, I agree with Stephen. The technology makes it easier than ever. You can get Oxford or Abingdon branded numbers which divert to your mobile. You can have instant setup e-commerce. You can have instant setup cloud storage. The clouds, in my sector, cloud storage was a big no-no until about 3 years ago, because obviously the data rules around NHS data and stuff are hugely complex and tricky to navigate, and the NHS is typically about 10 years behind the kind of commercial sector when it comes to this kind of thing. But even your medical records now are almost certainly hosted on Amazon Web AWS. That's where all the country's medical records are, because the security that's able to be afforded by someone like Amazon is far, far in excess of anything any smaller company could provide, and the kind of mirroring, if there's a fire in one server, they've got another one over here. They can tell you exactly which countries the servers are in, all that kind of thing. So it comes on, literally every day there's some new way that makes it easier to do something that was trickier yesterday. So yeah, I would agree, much easier.
Okay. Lastly, Jiro, your biggest barrier to getting into business?
Yeah, I would say, particularly in the events industry, it's easier than ever to find an event. The power of social media at the moment to just basically just get a ridiculous amount of outreach from a little amount of effort. I mean, before sort of COVID, and I wasn't even old enough to go into a club at this point, but I've sort of been told by the older people, but before COVID they were using physical tickets. So if you wanted to go out to an event on a night, you'd need to find your designated rep who's in your halls, and you'd need to get some cash out from an ATM and go and give it to him, and he'd give you a wristband for the so-called night. And you look now, all they have to do is sort of scan a QR code and press pay and use Apple Pay. It takes them 3 clicks to buy a ticket. It's easier than ever now, I think, to go. And of course, with given the current state of the economy and things, it is very difficult to keep it going, I think. But definitely, barriers to entry is easier than ever, especially now.
Yeah, thank you. So thanks for coming along tonight. We're going to go to refreshments, and that will carry on to about 8:30. It's fantastic you guys have been here, able to come along as Abingdon students. If you think about it in terms of the race to be an entrepreneur, you're there on the start line, you've turned up here, and I think the great messages we've had from tonight is just do it, go for it. So thank you. Thanks again to our speakers for coming along and spending your time with us. Great, thank you very much.